I gave you this triangle to show you that love doesn't start the same way all the time. And it's also a good thing to talk with the person you're intimate with to see about where you are in this triangle. This is developed by Robert Sternberg, and it somewhat based on a lot of research which talks about the progression and stages of romance. And I like this triangle because it shows you love can start from many different angles, if you will. It can come about initially from intimacy, or you can be committed, or you can be passionate. You move around throughout your relationship. So this is a good thing. And I also want to honor William Butler Yeats. Wine comes in at the mouth and love comes in at the eye. That's all we shall know for truth before we grow old and die. And Yeats was a great lover, and that's a picture of him I took in or the statue in Sligo, and I visited his grave site. And I always remember this line, and I wanted to share it with you because we're going to be talking about attraction. And there's lots of things. Why do we fall with one person and not another? Is it just physical attraction? Is there emotional attraction? There's all sorts of attractions. So we're going to look at a number of things, probably the most important, believe it or not, and it's almost too obvious, but proximity, what we call the exposure effect. I've spent a lot of time of my life on ships, and it's very, very common that during the duration of a long cruise, research cruise or otherwise, that you develop a relationship with someone just because you're familiar with them and you're exposed to them. Of course, physical attraction, but how similar are we? They say opposites attract, but similarity is very, very, very important. And how do we feel? Is that person open? Is there a reciprocal liking? Do they share intimate details with themselves? All sorts of things. And of course, arousal, you'll see lots and lots of lists, and lists aren't necessarily science, but they're a point of departure. And many of these are done just by interviews, and people may not always tell the truth in interview. They think they are, but not necessarily true. But what's interesting is almost always men are attracted to physically attractive women. Whereas if you ask a woman, they're more interested in personality traits, humor, emotionally healthy, understanding, wanting a commitment, financially stable, and so on. So this is a pattern we see all over the world. Even in the most recent careful studies, you still see a difference in attraction between men and women. Age is less important because quite often, and you might notice here that women are attracted to older because older shows status and what they've accomplished already. And women are attracted to intelligence because it shows these people have other interests and they're very successful. Now, I want to show you this. Don't worry about it. This is the bottom line. This very detailed study, you don't have to read about it. It's another functional magnetic resonance imaging study. They were shown pictures while they were in this, and they were asked if they were attracted and so on. It took these people less than a fifth of a second, not to fall in love, but to show extreme excitement and interest in someone. So love at first sight, at least in this study, is quite real and probable. And you've all experienced it. Love has become commodified. I don't mean to pick on anyone, but Helen Fisher developed functional magnetic resonance imaging of people. I'm not always sure about her techniques and the methods because not everyone has been able to replicate her work. And that's one thing about science. Science, you publish your methods and then someone else tries it and see if they get the same results. And it's not always the case. But anyway, She has become a self-proclaimed expert, and her books are always good to read because they provide a lot of interesting facts and a lot of research. But she's become a person basically uh, uh, who has her own uh, blog, her own website. She charges quite a bit for her speaking engagement. She's talked on TED and so on. But one of the things she's done is she was advisor to Match.com and developed a very intriguing psychological uh, survey. And you can take it if you want. And they match you according to what they think you would be sympathetic with. All sorts of things out there, all sorts of people will say they can match you using all these either colors or uh, surveys, or other things. Uh, and I love uh, many of these people not only invent different kinds of name. I've never heard of Doriatic or Oplatonic or whatever these things are, and they've come up with names like if you are, I have a squish on you. I'm total lush with you, or swish, but they're fun. Just, I don't think they bring you any closer to what love is all about. It's a money-making business. Attraction. Everyone thinks they know about attraction. And again, how do we know? This varies. But here's a study of what men think is attraction in terms of just looking at these three diagrams, in terms of the waist to hip ratio. And it might come as a surprise. Women tend to pick thinner, whereas men tend to pick heavier. But nonetheless, there is a ratio that is quoted a lot, 0.68 or 0.7. And well, is this a big difference? No, not really. And then you get all kinds of, this is the Daily Mail, London, I love it. And they did their own study. And by the way, statistically, there's no difference in any of these numbers between a curvy or athletic. And again, men tend to pick heavier, whereas women tend to pick, if women were picking, saying that's an attractive woman, they pick slender. What are women attracted to? Well, it may come as a surprise. Women prefer slender men. And this sort of thing, the muscular is not very attractive. But women are amazingly forgiving, which is we're very, very thankful for. Women do look for better educated, older, don't have to be good looking, but their status and what they earn. And they're also they're less willing to marry someone who isn't educated, doesn't have an earning potential, who's younger, and doesn't have a job. Women, in terms of evolution, want someone to take care of their children and provide for them during childhood. This is another psychologist who actually calls himself an evolutionary psychologist. I don't know what that means, but people have tried to usurp the biological field, but his books are very interesting in that he does take an evolutionary perspective. And men are attracted to young women because that's a sign of fertility and nubility. That is, they're more fertile. Women, on the other hand, are attracted to older men because they're successful and they were capable of providing security for their offspring. So physical attraction is less important to women. And I know that myself. I've been married a number of times. So don't have to be a good looking man. Opinions are not necessarily science. When you see kind of these, Pew is very reputable, partly because they get large sample size, and that's an important thing in science. If you're going to do a survey or you're going to study responses, you need a large what we call N, a large sample size, and Pew's usually does this. What do people most value in men? Well, that includes men too. What do, so honesty, morality, these things don't figure in cross-cultural studies. Ambition and leadership, yes. And success, these figure very, very high in cross-cultural studies because it means they're going to take care of the kids and the wife. What is most valued, sadly, in women is their attractiveness and how nurturing and kind and empathetic. Intelligence is often put very low there, but loyalty and dependability, these change. So be wary, and there's tons and tons of surveys out there. But biologically, men are attracted to youth. They're attracted to clean skin, a little bit more ample, again, because they're probably capable of nursing for a longer period of time, those women, and so on. Creativity. This is a wonderful study. I like the title of it. Schizotypy, or schizotypy, creativity and mating success in humans. We've all known this. I used to work with Commander Cody in San Francisco in the Haight-Ashbury Dairies, and I had set up soundstage and things like that. Women are attracted to romantic, creative types, especially musicians. But it works both ways. Men are attracted to artistic women as well. Remember that men and women think differently. If you haven't figured that out by now, I think you have to do more research. Part of this has to do with women's, this is a female brain, showing access. If you kind of do this and do that, cross your thumbs, that's your brain. And this is your cerebral hemispheres. And they have different functions, but they are joined right here at what is called the corpus callosum. And the corpus callosum allows the hemispheres to speak to each other. Women have more connections between these two hemispheres. Hence, they can access different regions of their brain when they're thinking about something. So they respond to connections, to stories. Men are very linear in their thinking because they use one hemisphere at a time. I wish I could remember her name, but a great series of research projects on school kids, and they followed them year after year after year after year. And one of the things that came up is when there was a disciplinary action at this school, if the girls were deciding what to do, they would consider every aspect. How will the discipline affect her friends? How will it affect her family? How will it affect the school? And the boys, if they were on the discipline committee, would say, hang them all, let God sort them out. Men play by rules, and hey, they broke the rule, and so on. Men want to learn how it works. They want the facts. They want a linear sort of thing. And one of my favorite, of course, is men have smaller vocabularies in general, and this influences their senses. But men see, for instance, only see purple. They don't see mauve, lavender, orchid, eggplant, or anything. And that is showing how they think linearly. Now, we're going to change gears completely. We're going to become more animal and talk about, remember the hormones that were so important initially, like oxytocin and vasopressin, initiating pair bonding and commitment, and testosterone and sexual impulses. Well, we know that there are chemicals released by animals, and that includes us, okay? There is something, I blame it on religion more than anything else, that we do not agree that we're an animal. We're something like an angel, but we didn't evolve and we don't have animal-like instincts or behaviors. So pheromones are hormones that are released into the environment externally by our skin, by our genital regions, by our probably our saliva, by our armpit hair, and these affect the behavior of others within our same species. So you can read this information. It goes not only up, it goes to a particular area, which for years was denied that we even had this. It's a gland buried in the vomer bone of the upper palate and nose, and it has a direct link to the brain. So smells just go up to the olfactory nerve and into the brain, but pheromones activate this vomer nasal organ. And this was first found in animals, very obvious, especially in ungulates and so on, and also in insects. And it will indicate the dominance of this individual, their identity, their mating status, their emotional state, all sorts of things. It's still controversial and contentious that we have these things, just because we deny that we are animals. Okay, where would I go? There. Now, some of the most powerful ones, they're very closely related to testosterone, androstenone, androstenone, androstenol. All of these are very similar. They're very pungent. They were first found in the saliva of pigs, but they're also secreted into the circulation in humans, and they will be released by our axillary, that is our armpit, our genital hair. That's why we have hair there, so it can atomize. Also saliva and sweat. Some of the ability to detect these things are inherited because people variously report it as being very musky, vanilla, or floral. It's also, by the way, found in truffles, and that's why boars are used to hunt them. But these are very powerful. This is one of the classic experiments, and it was done with a large number of people. They took t-shirts from men. They made them sleep in the t-shirts unmarked for 2 nights without wearing any cologne or bathing or anything. They were marked, and then the women were allowed to smell them. And they ranked their order of what they found attractive. And one interesting thing is they could detect how dissimilar they were genetically. This MHC means the major histocompatibility complex. I'm sorry about that, but this is a marker that tells you how related you are. So when you are transplanting an organ, you have to match as closely as possible this marker on every one of your organs. Women can detect this and know if it's close to them or dissimilar to them. And oddly, when women were on birth control pills, they couldn't smell it. They couldn't smell the similar ones. What they preferred was just distant, maybe second or third cousin. If it was too distant, they didn't like it. If it was too similar to you genetically, they didn't like it. And this has been shown even people in dances. Dancing with people, they would say, oh, I think this may be a cousin of mine. And I may have told you the great thing about Iceland is completely genetically, genomically identified. And because of the way names are taken by children, you don't know if you're related when you find out the person's last name. So they have on their phones an app. When they meet someone they like, they touch their phones together and it shows them how genetically related they are to each other. This has been repeated many, many times. So it says um, this probably relates to how close we are to someone, and there is a natural avoidance of incest. This is showing you where the VN, the vomer nasal organ is, and it shows we're incredibly sensitive, particularly to these male hormones. It will affect the mood of women, their focus, and their sexual response. So probably also, this is a very important thing outside of just physical attraction. You gotta love science. This is one experiment where they literally sprayed androsterol or drostanol into urinals, European kind of urinals and so on. And women went into these. When men approached them, they avoided them. So anyway, it shows something, we don't know what. They say maybe male choice and so on. But anyway, though we deny our animal nature, you can go out and buy all of these things. You can buy Arouse X, RX, and it is pig essence. It is androsterol. You can buy a spray, and this is, farmers use this to spray on their sows. And when the male comes up, he mates automatically. So this is what is hoped when you spray it on you, that the male will be attracted. Who knows? There's another one. And copulin was discovered using tampons. It's a very volatile aliphatic acid, and it's secreted by the vagina. When men are exposed to this pheromone, they begin to increase their testosterone 150%. It also inhibits the ability to assess the attractiveness of women's faces. It decreases men's cooperation, which means they're now aggressive after a particular mate. So this is normally secreted during copulation. So it makes men more aroused when they smell it. And of course, you can buy this for women anyway. Although there are some gay ones here, here's formula Ferrone with copulin. Here's another one, copulinic structure, the essence of woman, the real essence of woman. If a woman ever found out where this was from, I doubt if she would put it on her body. Looking at the internet and the sale of copulin, there's this kind of caveat. Men actually fear that it will erase their memories. And also that the woman can hypnotize him and insert subconscious thoughts whenever he smells this. So anyway, just caveat empire. Pheromones are released in all sorts of situations. They've been studied extensively in mammals, especially important mammals like cattle and horses, but also mice, which is the most studied animal in the world, outside of a few yeast. And there are a strange number of behaviors that are noted that are pheromone induced. So I'm not going to talk about all of these, but it shows many of these are probably present in humans, although we tend to ignore them. The Coolidge effect gets its name from President Calvin Coolidge. Was taken to a chicken ranch, I think in Arkansas. He was separated from his wife and was shown different areas of of the ranch. His wife was shown this prize rooster who could inseminate 30 hens. And she said, please tell the president when he is shown this rooster. And so when the president came around, was shown the rooster, he said, 30 hens, but 30 different hens. And it's true. The Coolidge effects means that when males mate, say with a hen, as he will tire. Eventually, if you introduce a new hen, he will go at it again. And this is used over and over. If the bull wears himself out, all you have to do is bring in another heifer and he'll go at it again. This may be one of the reasons that humans cheat. We look for variety. And why? It may have driven early forms of mating to polygyny and other sorts of things. But the Coolidge effect is very real in humans. We know it. This is a kind of strange graph, but this shows you the minutes to ejaculation in mice. If it's the same mouse, you kind of are similar mice, you get very slowed response. But if you change the mice, you can keep going and going and going. This probably is related to pornography. And pornography just basically means you change the stimulus all the time. You can just click on something else, a new video, whatever, you have a new partner. And so each time you do this, you have a reward dopamine flushing. And this may, over time, have a very profound influence on how your brain responds to dopamine and also to sexual excitement or arousal. The Vandenberg effect, this mostly with mammals, but also with cattle and sheep and so on. And it works even if the females are exposed to bedding from the male. That is, females housed with males undergo accelerated puberty. That is, they come into estrus earlier than they would normally. This means, well, the presence of a male will actually cause the female young to mature quicker. Strangely, this is also shown in humans. And this is a very unique kind of graph, but you go back to, say, Europe in the late or mid 1800s, puberty didn't hit until 17 to 18. Now, what's happening in Europe? It's the same thing that's happening in the United States. If we go back to the United States, 1900, girls hit puberty somewhere around 14 to 15, but now they're hitting it at 11. Now, some of that is health, but most of it probably has to do, and we know this happens when a strange male is actually in the family. To try to get out of that situation, the girl will have hit puberty earlier. But if you look at this trend, where can it go? That's remarkable in terms of physiological response. And we put that up to the Vandenberg response. Presence of a male can also initiate estrus in other older females. That sounds strange, but the presence of a male will cause them to come into heat and also synchronize their heat, and 90% will mate within 5 days. So just bringing a male in will cause females to accentuate their estrus. I've noticed this sort of thing on ships where everyone's confined, intimate and passing and so on. You will notice that certain females become very, very receptive. This is done with sheep and goats and cattle and so on, and it's very well understood. And it probably does the same in humans. Female mice without males around actually stop estrus. And they show what is called pseudo pregnancy, which is also there in humans, by the way, especially in young teenage girls who maybe had relations very young and they're suddenly convinced they're pregnant and they stop their period, their breasts enlarge, they get a little bit nauseous and so on. But there's no chorionic gonadotrophic hormone in their blood. They are not pregnant. This happens in all mammals. It's called pseudo pregnancy. All you have to do is put the male back in there and the females begin to go into heat again and they synchronize it, which is ideal for the male, right? This has been studied a number of times, which is known as the McClintock effect, but it does the same thing. That is, women in close contact, like in a nursing home where this was first studied, will synchronize their menstrual cycles. And this all has to do with the pheromones being released. A little bit of old-fashioned behavior. Many of our behaviors are instinctual and they're what we call a fixed action pattern. And once you get that, when a bird lays an egg, it sees that egg and it reacts to the pattern on the egg. All right, that's a fixed action pattern. A fish, like a little stickleback that lives in the Carmel River, if it sees anything with a red belly, it will attack it because it's probably another male. A young seagull sees that red on the dot of anything, but hopefully its parent will peck out it because the parent will then release things. Well, the fixed action pattern, breasts are forward facing and enlarged in humans. Why? As Woody Allen says, breasts make men stupid. If you enlarge the fixed action symbols, that is, you take an oyster catcher or a seagull's egg, make it 10 times larger, but keep the same pattern so that the instinctual response is to try to incubate it, it will prefer this bigger egg over its real egg. So the same thing has happened with humans. Human breasts have gotten larger and men have gotten stupider. So one little aside, I have to put this in here because it's one of the great experimental evidence. We talk a lot about natural selection, but also sexual selection. These are guppies. Some of you may have had them. In Trinidad, there's a beautiful little guppy, and in these rivers that flow down off the mountains, there are guppies in the high parts of the mountains, but there's no predators up there. In the lower parts of the mountains, there's a big predator, a kind of cichlid fish. Where there's a predator, then the male guppies, where the predation is high, the male guppies are plain because you want to hide from your predator. But up in the mountains, where there's no predator, the male guppies get gorgeous. This is what is known as sexual selection, because the females will choose these over any of the plain old ordinary male. And you can think about this in terms of why young women are attracted to rock and roll stars or to poets or other things. This is an ornament on the person. So this is sexual selection versus natural selection. And one of the great studies was they took puppies from these low things, guppies, and they put them up here. They took these guppies down here, and over a couple generations, these up here got colorful, these down here got dull. There's a lot going on in humans that we don't like to think about, but even in mice, there are all these hormones and pheromones that influence mating and status, the synchronization of estrus, the terminations of pregnancy, acceleration of puberty. And along with this, mice squeak. You've heard squeaking. Well, that is actually vocalizations. They do talk to each other. We don't understand it. There's some of it we understand. So think about humans. We have the same sort of impact from one another, especially in intimacy. Uh, just look at a little mouse. These are all the different pheromones that we know about. And some are released by tears, some by urine, some by glands. There are anal glands and so on. And this is all the different pathways these pheromones work in the brain. We're not far away from mice. We share 75% of their DNA. So we act similarly. One interesting thing, if you take these mice and ablate, that is, you burn the vomer nasal organ, then all bets are off. None of these effects will occur. One last effect that is well known, and these are Israeli kibbutzim. These are communities that have schools, factories, and big farms and mills. And these kids are born together, grow up together, go to school together, maybe join the army together, but they will never marry. They're just too intimate. So they may have had their first sexual play and experiences, but not love. And this is really well known and studied in lots of places. There's something else. You know it probably as the Oedipal complex and so on, but you gotta love science. So you take baby lambs, you put them on the teat of a goat mother. When she grows up, she tries to mate with goats. You take goats, let them nurse on a sheep mother. When they grow up, they are imprinted on their mother sheep and they try to mate with. Males in these kinds of experiments are especially vulnerable to imprinting. Again, strange studies. They took rats, they smeared citral on their nipples and genitalia. They nursed their babies, and when these babies grew up, they preferred lemon scented. Imprinting comes from Konrad Lorenz, who realized that geese, when whatever they saw that was moving, once they hatched out of the egg, imprinted on that as their parent. So he would raise geese as if he were the parent. And there's so many ways. We've often talked about whether or not we imprint on our parents, but studies have shown that men do prefer women that more resemble their mothers, whereas women do not prefer men that look like their fathers. This is very weak, but statistically significant, and imprinting is around us in very strange ways. Now, mating, almost 1,000 primitive societies were looked at, and many of these disappeared before we even had a chance to look at them. But what is the most common form? 40% of societies looked at are polygamous in one way or another. Now, we use the term polygyny, and that generally means one male and multiple females. So this is what human societies have shown in the past, and it's still around. Monogamy was quite rare in the past, and it may disappear again in the future. So monogamy, one male, one female. Polyandry, one female, multiple males, almost unheard of in humans. However, it does persist in few cases. And where it persists, it has to do with who inherits the property, the land especially. If the inheritance is on the matrilineal line, then the female is all powerful and she can have multiple husbands. Promiscuity, that's kind of junior high school, all right? And promiscuity is sort of a mating. You remember the voles? Most mammals, 95% of mammals are promiscuous. There was that one vole and a few monkeys or lemurs that are monogamous. A few primates are polygamous, and we'll talk about that. So here's another looking the marriage systems across a more recent study. And again, mild to general, it's enormous. Monogamy, only 20%. So what has happened? Well, religion has dictated the future of marriage, starting back at 2,000 years ago. Religion got involved with marriage in a big way. So some religions accepted it, some did not. But polygamy, and it's interesting, whenever there's religious cults, one of the first things that happens is polygamy becomes legalized again. The Davidian cult and also the Mormons. But if you really want to surprise yourself, read about the Oneida, one of my favorite Second Awakening cults. During the 1840s, there was a movement across the Northeast of the United States where a whole series of new religions arose. The most prominent, well, Shakers, Oneidas, Mennonites, and so on, and then the Mormons. But the Oneida is probably the most extreme. All right, evolution, sexual evolution, just like the guppies, have shaped the female body. The secondary sexual features, the breast and buttocks, are enhanced. Long hair is enhanced. Subcutaneous fat, which is good for survival, but it also makes things you can touch. Elongated sexual receptivity. That is, once puberty is hit, a woman is sexual and fertile all the way up until menopause and even after. The menstrual cycle is very important because it's largely, it hides the ovulation. And women's orgasmic response is acute and enhanced and multiple. But no other primate shows that. We can thank good Kinsey and also Masters and Johnson, who looked at the sexual response. And it still comes as a surprise to husbands anyway, that women are capable of multiple orgasms, although they may never get a chance to experience them. We have very strong pair bonding, infant bonding, and familial bonding. And one of the things that really is crucial in humans, because of what we call the obstetric dilemma, in order to walk upright and to have such a big-headed baby, we have to have assisted delivery. And it's still something that we need quite a bit of help with at times. If a baby was born at the same level of development as a chimpanzee, you would be pregnant for 18 months. Thankfully, it's only 9. So the baby is helpless, takes a long period of nursing, and then 20 years of bringing them up. This is the obstetric dilemma. This is humans showing you the head size and the pelvic circle. And there's also a difference, and we won't go into all of this, but men, we have reduced dimorphism. That means men and women aren't, they're pretty similar in the body shape and size. There's a strong parental bond even in men. And I'll talk about the penis in a minute. Men have a very rapid orgasmic resolution. They reach a plateau, they climax, and then they kind of go to sleep or smoke a cigarette. And most of the time they leave the woman hanging on the plateau without any orgasm. Men have very slow sperm. That may sound funny, but I'll tell you why. Oxytocin-rich seminal fluid, which will cause the uterus to contract and actually dip down into the vaginal canal and begin to kind of siphon up the seminal fluid. And this was only realized in Sweden when they began to put cameras, but the oxytocin, this actually helps fertility. All right, what does this mean? Chimps have very fast swimming sperm, real chimps, and they're promiscuous. That is, the female may mate with 15 males, one after the other. So whose sperm is going to win? Evolution says the fastest sperm will win. Or if you can be the last, or if you can plug the vaginal canal after you mate, which many, many mammals do, and many insects, they plug it. If you're promiscuous, again, here's macaques, very fast. Human sperm, quite variable. There's no reason to be speedy because there's a tendency to be monogamous. Gorillas are polygynous. There's no other male going to mate with the females. Doesn't need fast sperm. This is evolutionary biology. This is sometimes called sperm competition. There's evidence in humans that fertility goes up once the man, say the man's on a business trip, he comes home, he has more sperm that he produces. There's also evidence that there's blocking sperm and other kinds of sperm and killer sperm. But anyway, this one of my favorite diagrams because it says so much. This is the size of a gorilla male. This is the size of his penis. Not very big, is it? Testes? No. Let's go to the chimp. This is the size, very small, but look at his testes. They're enormous. What are they? They're promiscuous. Who's going to win? The one with the most sperm and the fastest sperm. Men produce about a teaspoon of sperm. Chimps, almost a half cup. Now, also look at this. This is the size of the penis. Men have very small testicles compared to the promiscuous chimps. Very, about average compared to the gorilla, but the penis is enlarged. And of course, look at the female genitalia, very enlarged in humans, although we never talk about this. And the breasts are very, very enlarged. Both the bonobo, which is a very different species, and it's also the one closest to us, they're pretty close. They're not very dimorphic. Regular chimps are very dimorphic, and look at the gorillas, extremely dimorphic. That's the alpha. And I'd love to talk about the bonobos at length, but they are just so off the wall, and they basically are hypersexual. Also, something else happened. Chimps and apes and many others, the penis shape isn't very important, but chimps and apes and a number of other primates have a bone in their penis. This is called the os penis or the baculum. It's very involved in the copulation. It can be different shapes. We still have, humans have the gene for this, but we've lost it. And also, when we look at the penis size in humans compared to bonobos, which is surprising they're the same size as chimp because these are much more sexually active. Bonobos have sex just for fun. I mean, they do everything. They're the only other primate that has ventral missionary style copulation. They have oral sex. They do everything imaginable. That's why the Geographic would never publish any article on them. Gorillas, they don't need a big penis. This shape, and by the way, if any of you are ever in Reykjavik, one of my favorite places is the Icelandic Phallological Museum. It's devoted to penises. And these are sculptures of real human penises, molded and so on. But this shape, the glands, is designed as a kind of suction cup. So during copulation, should there be any sperm inside the vaginal canal preceding his copulation, it will suck it out. 90% effectiveness at removing any other competitor's sperm. So natural selection favored this kind of shape. We are not very dimorphic, which means we're either promiscuous or we're polygamous or monogamous. It argues toward polygamous. You may remember this was a little anodized aluminum plaque we put on the Pioneer and Voyager spacecraft in the 70s. And this, of course, was designed by Carl Sagan. And the first drawing was vetoed because the first drawing had the pudendal slit. And the reason they rejected it, they didn't want to scare or embarrass aliens, but their argument was that that slit is not shown on Grecian and Roman sculpture. Why are we monogamous? Well, we're not, but we do form family groups. And probably the reason these family groups and monogamy was to protect the offspring. And this has been demonstrated a number of ways. Male infanticide is thought to lead to social monogamy. And even a situation like this with two males and a female probably is a form of monogamy we call social monogamy. And something to stress. You watch the news, you hear what's going on right now. Remember, the news by definition is bad. TV holds our interest because it shows deviant behavior. Humans are kind and loving. And that gave us a distinct and social advantage. And when low-ranking males changed their tack with competing with higher-ranking males to reveal their more caring side, they became companions in what we call social monogamy and polygyny. Some people argue, and there's some evidence, that there may be genetic underprinting to monogamy. It's been found in other animals, but not really found in us, and it's not really looked for oftentimes. But I love to look at the history of humans. And here is a burial from 34,000 years ago. A husband and wife in Sungir, Russia, buried together, probably died of an epidemic. They were not immediate cousins. We had enough DNA to do analysis. They're probably the second or third cousins. They're part of a larger hunting group. They probably met during a seasonal nexus, and that nexus allows them to mate outside of their initial tribal or family group. And the number of these burials have been analyzed, and they were extended families, and often the spouse would be distant in terms of their major histocompatibility complex, that is a second or third cousin. And they were often buried together, say if they died together, and often decorated. I think this speaks of marriage arrangements back in the almost Paleolithic, 30,000 years ago. Traditional people were hunter-gatherers, and one of the things they would do, they would meet periodically. One of my favorites is Sonoran Indians and also Baja Indians would collect saguaro pods and then grind the seeds and have a big festival. And all the tribes would meet. Some of you, if you've ever traveled up in the foothills, there is a place called Indian Grinding Rock State Park. This is a granite outcrop, and all of these where the tribes would gather, grind their acorn, have dances, sweats, play games, and marry outside of their immediate family. This is a long-standing tradition. The Chumash did it and so on. So what this would mean is you had family groups in a particular territory. They would wander around looking for certain things, but once a year, usually at some sort of celebration, especially food, they would gather on these ceremonial grounds, dance, eat, and also then probably pick out mates. And that avoided incest and also, well, avoided near genetic marriage. Marriages, we have to think genetically or evolutionary wise, they avoid consanguineous inbreeding, and incest is something that is a human universal. There's all kinds of imposed regulations and so on. So marriage was a reproductive social arrangement that traditionally involved the extended family and other extended families. It dispersed wealth, it facilitated group labor, it enhanced social status, and intertribal harmony. That is, we get along by and large. Marriage per se is not quite universal, but some sort of inner harmony social thing is. If you're interested, there's a number of fabulous books written about marriage, but marriages originally were probably arranged because of the wealth, because of land, because of status and inheritance, and polygamy was preferred. Babies were optional, and infidelity was allowed, or sisters were used, and so on. And generally, it required a number of people consenting. Monogamy really didn't come in until about 1000 AD, especially when the church began to control these things. And then by about 1500, there were civil licensing. And only about mid to late 1700s, and this is not my opinion, this is people who have studied marriage, love doesn't enter the equation until about the 1700s. The knightly, courtly love was earlier, and it really had nothing to do with romantic love. Marriage and love has changed since the 1900s, when women began to get economic independence. And of course, probably the greatest history of marriage in America was right after the war. If you're interested, Stephanie Coots, she also has made a career with this, although she's a professor at Evergreen. I visited her a couple times at Evergreen. Very fascinating history, lots of things. And the notion that a couple would marry for love was considered almost antisocial, even subversive for most of human history. You think you know about marriage? This is a Krong tribe in Cambodia. When the girl reaches of age, which they're 13, they make her a little hut. And she lives in this for a while, and she can have any number of suitors and overnight guests. And that's how she falls in love. If she has children out of this, then they're raised by the family as their own. But this is sort of a kind of cohabiting for a while. Most traditional marriages have some sort of transaction. Bride price, bride service, gift exchange, women exchange, dowry. Often it came not only with the wife, but also her sisters, and dowries and indirect dowries. This is very complicated. If you want to read more about it, read Stephanie's history, but there's other histories. The traditional, when we think of Western marriages, it allowed a gain in status, fulfills a social duty, and so on. And it makes alliances. Love, probably not till the 18th century. What's the most common Western marriage? It's monogamy, but it's serial monogamy. You marry, you divorce, you remarry. You're legally married to one person at a time. Margaret Mead predicted this early in the 40s. brilliant insight into sexual behavior. Uh, and this is more common in males because they can remarry easier, because being older doesn't necessarily mean they're less attractive. So serial monogamy, which is the most common form. There are other kinds of traditional remarriages. That is, if a husband dies, then the wife is married automatically to the brother, and so on. There's lots of these. They're called sorate or levirate. If the husband dies, his wife must remarry the brother, and so on. This is actually described biblically. There are many ghost marriages where you might marry someone who's died, and you might also have ghost children by them. Today, just think of all the types of different marriages: same-sex marriage, common law, cousin marriage, and so on. Many traditions still where you have to outmarry from your clan or tribe. Look at today, there are spirit spouses. You may marry a ghost as well, or some sort of god. It just goes on. During the 60s, there were polyfidelous relationships, and so on. And we're still interested in this. Look at television. How many TV wedding shows? And many of these are just, of course, set up, but we're fascinated to see how they fail. Likewise, dating. How many dating shows are there? Just this endless number of dating shows, and they're worldwide. India even has these, which you would not suspect since they have so many arranged marriage. Today, marriage is mostly, or at least people assess marriage has to be based on love. And then later, long commitment, companionship, having children. Look how low it is. Financial stability. That is really different. This would have all been rearranged 2,000 years ago, or even 1,500 years ago. It would have been read this way. So polygamy is still around, of course, strongly based on religion. It's still recognized under civil law. Polygamy in the United States technically is illegal. It's still practiced in parts of Mexico because of Jack Mormons and others. But living in polygamous households is much more common than polygamous marriage. The age of first marriage, which is very interesting. This is just by first marriages. And when you look over in Africa and Asia, you still marry quite young. It's a little bit later now, except in the Central America and so on, very young. One of the things that has changed, actually since 1900, but even more recently, people are waiting to get married. You think about this, used to be down to 23. Actually, for a while, it was really low, but now people in the 70s were married at 19. Now, the first marriages are in their 30s. Child marriage, it's still possible to marry in the United States. Not only your cousin, but also a 13-year-old cousin. And not surprisingly, the ages in the South are much younger. If you look at this, the younger ages, or there's no law and record, which is surprising. Child marriages around the world, they're still very common. Usually, they don't have age limits, but they certainly less than 16. Interesting, Canada doesn't really have an age limit, and that partly has to do with their indigenous population. Of course, marriage, there's cheating. Again, most of these studies are done by surveys. And one thing about humans is they lie quite a bit. When DNA fingerprinting was first introduced, that was introduced in Scotland, when they did studies, they found that almost 20% of the children were not sired by their legal father. They stopped doing this because people didn't want to know this. So these kinds of studies are done by surveys. So we do know that men cheat more than women, and that men probably lie more than women. It can range from 20% to 40%, and women 20. Actually, most of the time, women are down to 15. Well, race will have an effect on this. That's both men and women. There still are adultery laws, which is very interesting. And again, these are the most common figures, but again, look at the range. Interestingly, as people get older, at least men, since they still have access, they're still reproductively capable, men cheat even as they get older, 70. Women, after a while, they give up pretty much. It's not worth it. This is probably something you've never seen, a very imaginative, very interesting study. This was looked at a high school in the Midwest. And these are teens, 800 teens looked at for a year and a half. Who dated who? Boys, of course, are blue, girls, you know. And relationships are chains. And this, if you zero in on any one of these, you know, you can find one boy, 3 girls. Occasionally you can find 1 girl, 1, 2, 3, 4 boys, you know, so on. But this person, in essence, had relationship with everyone in the high school, in essence. If you look, you zero in on some of the individuals, here again, 1 girl, 4 boys. This was the rarest of all. 1 boy, 1 girl, and it ended there. Here's another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 boys around this 1 girl. Anyway, people lie and people cheat. This is a public health survey done recently in San Francisco, tracking syphilis and HIV, and they tracked sexual relationships. So just look at this. And there's one male, and look at the cluster. And then that's connected again because this male came in, and so on and so on. So how can you ever control HIV or syphilis or infidelity for that matter? Stanford will never admit this, but a student kept track of a cohort from Stanford over 20 years and who they encountered after 20 years. And it was almost incestuous. You can't have this kind of cluster of infidelity and people saying they never cheated. What people do and what they say are 2 different things. Jealousy, it's a green-eyed monster. About 1/3 of all victims of homicide are by jealous spouses. And of course, breakup, most people, 85% people have experienced breakup. It's a severe grief, sometimes causing psychotic breakdowns. Being dumped, it just creates all sorts of things, hormone changes, but also the brain changes. And like I say, it can cause psychotic breakdown and also murder. Divorce, what's happening to divorce? Well, it is declining, which is interesting. Reasons, of course, people cheat, but they say it's the main reason they get, or one of the main reasons, lack of commitment, infidelity. Who still marries? People are marrying less and less. Although people say they're getting married for love, love may not last. What's interesting, different forms of behavior have come up. 3-minute dating. That is, you sit down on a table, 3 minutes, guy blows the whistle, you move to the next spot. In many cases, this person, they saw 25 different people, And it only takes them, again, about 1/5 of a second to decide whether they like each other. This is still a very popular way of dating. There's no more Lonely Hearts Club. Uh, there's a lot of speed dating. And all you have to do is put any kind of app on your phone and you can date with Tinder or uh, Meet Me, so on, and speed dating. And some of these are specialized for teens and so on. Uh, Other studies over speed dating found 3 minutes that the person liked each other. And another Stanford study, 4 minutes, they would meet each other and say, let's have a date. Again, other studies like the one I quoted earlier, 1/5 of a second. Something you may not have heard of, but people are hooking up, and hooking up means they get together for sexual activity. And now they hook up in the fall, and this is called cuffing. And they make a commitment, they move in together, um, they get through the worst of the fall and the winter, and then they break up because of swimsuits and they can start over. But you can wear a bracelet to say that you're cuffing. And this shows a cuff-o-meter time in the winter, breaks up in the summer. And a lot of people, especially urban people, are doing these. Men tend to fall in love faster than women, although we tend to think that women are more susceptible. The future of dating, well, speed dating, cuffing, online dating, also something known as polyamory. That is, your best friend is also your girlfriend's best friend. So you form different kinds of groups, and there's terms and diagrams and so on. It's become more and more popular over time with the new generations. They have their own flag, their own symbols, and so on. Uh, and then it's estimated that nearly 1/4 of Americans now are in a non-monogamous relationship. So this may be an end to monogamy. Polyamory is coming up. Also, there's you need sex? Well, you can have virtual sex. You can have virtual sex with your lover. Uh, and virtual sex is very popular. You can have it by yourself. You can have a really surround effect with a helmet with gives you vibration and sound, as well as other sorts of things. You can go to a cyber brothel with a virtual prostitute. These are very popular. There are a number of countries that have sex doll brothels. There was one in Texas, and then it was quickly outlawed, partly because of fear of child doll pornography. So there's none in the United States, and we're so puritanical that this would never happen. But they're all over Asia. You just go in and pick your choice. Some people get so attached. There are a lot of sex bot marriages. These are people who've married their sex bot. There are a couple of people who built their own sex bots and married them. They're legally married to their bots. And it can go either way. She's married to her hubby. I'm not sure what kind of sex bot that is, but it's satisfying. You can pick from different designs and different features. Japan has a design boom, which also has a virtual sex part of it. And this is now known as digisexuality. You can buy suits. You do not need a partner anymore. Anything you can imagine is now available, partially virtual, partially real. This is developed by Tenga Industries. Some of these are only $300. Marriage itself may be on the way out. 40% think that marriage is a concept that's on its way out. And marriage in 100 years will probably reinvent itself. Fewer people are getting married, and they're getting married later and later. More people living with a partner, and it also depends on what kind of income you have. The same is happening in Europe. These are people that marriage rate, this is very, very low. This is almost down to American standards. And in Japan, really incredibly low marriage rates. People who have solo households, very large in Europe, Scandinavia especially. That is, they may have children, but they're alone. The future of marriage, it might grow, probably not. It's probably going to collapse as people look for sexual stimulation and intimacy by other means, including technology. Birth rates decline, maybe the government will have to institute something, or there'll be some sort of transition. We think that in the very near future, probably in 10 years, there'll be some sort of transition where there'll be different forms of marriage, where love becomes diminished, and maybe love even collapses. These are projected futures. With that said, last week was the highest number of weddings Las Vegas ever performed, 22. And also they hit their 5 millionth wedding performed in Las Vegas, probably by Elvis or somebody. Tying the knot. It's an ancient Celtic tradition, and this is known as hand fasting, and whoever did the ceremony would wrap ribbons, knots, often Celtic knots, or in many cases, people just told the knot. And this is probably from the Middle Ages, and it's still passed on. And so we still call walking down the aisle, taking the plunge, getting spliced, plight your troth, or tying the knot. Now, along with Martin Luther King, I think love is what drove human evolution rather than hate. We wouldn't be here if someone hadn't loved someone. And I think love had a great deal to do with human evolution and still does. I don't know what marriage will be like in the future, but I know love will always be there. And remember all the kinds of love: parental love, filial love, love of family, love of friends, love of pets. These are all forms of love. It doesn't have to be romantic. It will probably end up being romantic for a brief time, but love will keep us all together.